Jason Unruhe, Dankey Kang, Comrade Net, Ewoks Unhinged and the rest of the ragtag bunch of sexual miscreants that gather around Jason Unruhe and Dankey Kang have claimed that YouTube user, Fat Controller, is either a fascist or a Nazi in their humble political estimation. Little do they realize that they have become confused by another interloper who they have merely christened and scapegoated as Fat Controller. More fool them. Fat Controller does not care what these scum have to say in their confused little worlds. He knows himself and his history. And he has a proud, anti-fascist history. His family history of fighting fascists, National Socialists and Imperialists puts them to shame and casts their own histories into ill repute. My relatives in the 2nd Division, of the Australian Infantry Forces or AIF, fought a valiant blocking action against the rampaging German National Socialist forces at Thermopylae, Greece, 1940. This was just after the opening of the Western Theater of World War II. This was the scene of the great ancient Spartan last stand against the Persian hordes of Asia Minor, that similarly ended in strategic victory. The Spartans, led by King Leonidas I of Sparta, and the Achaemenid Empire of Xerxes I had fought at Thermopylae. It was fought over the course of 3 days, during the Second Persian invasion of Greece, in August 480 BCE. General Sir Thomas Blamey led the Australian detachment at the Battle of Thermopylae. The Australians used their 6-pounder artillery pieces that they would later have to abandon at the southern coast of Greece. The Australian artillerists destroyed many German National Socialist tanks and half-tracks at the Thermopylae Pass below Mount Olympus. They delayed the Germans enough to allow the evacuation of Allied forces from Greece to Crete. The Australians also threw off the entire coordination of the National Socialist attack on Soviet Socialist Russia. As a result, Operation Barbarossa became bogged down in the mud of the Russian winter, and the offensive failed to conquer Moscow. Similarly, on the Aegean island of Crete, my evacuated family member took part in bayonet charges, pig-sticking overwhelming National Socialist Fallschirmjäger forces, parachuted in among them. The Australians returned time and again, making sortie after sortie, out of ammo and with fixed bayonets to kill hundreds of National Socialist paratroopers scrambling for their automatic weapons. The Australians of the 2nd Division destroyed their vehicles and gave their weapons over to local insurgents to carry on the fight, accompanied by pockets of Australians who had elected to stay to organize sabotage. Then the remaining men slipped away in Greek trawlers along Crete's coast. The remnants of the 2nd Division joined up with the 6th Division in Syria. The Western Desert Campaign, also known as the Desert War, took place in the deserts of Egypt and Libya and was the main theater in the North African campaign of the Second World War. Military operations began in June 1940 with the Italian declaration of war and the Italian invasion of Egypt from Libya in September. Operation Compass, a British and Commonwealth 5-day raid in December 1940, led to the total destruction of the Italian 10th Army. My relative took part in the defeat of the fascist Italian forces in Operation Compass. Benito Mussolini desperately sought help from Adolf Hitler, who sent a small German force to Tripoli under Directive 22 on the 11th of January. The Afrika Korps, under General-Lieutenant Erwin Rommel, was formerly under Italian command as Italy was the main Axis power in the Mediterranean and North Africa. In the spring of 1941, Rommel led Operation Sonnenblume, which pushed the Allies back to Egypt except for the siege of Tobruk at the port, which was manned by Australian and New Zealand troops, my relative among them. At the end of 1941, the Axis forces were defeated in Operation Crusader and retired again to El Agheila. I had civilian family at the raid on Darwin in 1942. The American president, FDR, had first tempted the Japanese to strike at 6 cruisers in the Philippines. Finally, he settled for his casus belli and false flag for the Pacific War using old World War I dreadnoughts like the Oklahoma to rest on Pearl Harbor's bottom. These could be easily coffin-dammed and refloated after the Japanese torpedo planes had left. And of course, the Essex and the Wasp aircraft carriers were not in harbor mysteriously. Hence the Japanese held their heavy bombers back. Yet this was not the case at Darwin some months later when the same Japanese carrier task force struck. The Japanese admiral said, "It will be like cracking an egg with a sledgehammer," as Darwin was totally undefended. My relative, a truck driver, assisted in the evacuation of wounded back to Alice Springs through one of the hottest deserts on Earth over 1,000 miles away. The town was devastated by the aerial raid and over 234 people were killed. The bombing of Darwin, also known as the Battle of Darwin, on February 19, 1942 was the largest single attack ever mounted by a foreign power on Australia. On that day, 242 Japanese aircraft, in 2 separate raids, attacked the town, ships in Darwin's harbor and the town's 2 airfields in an attempt to prevent the Allies from using them as bases to contest the invasion of Timor and Java during World War II. Darwin was lightly defended relative to the size of the attack, and the Japanese inflicted heavy losses upon Allied forces at little cost to themselves. The urban areas of Darwin also suffered some damage from the raids and there were a number of civilian casualties. More than half of Darwin's civilian population left the area permanently, before or immediately after the attack. The 2 Japanese air raids were the first, and largest, of more than 100 air raids against Australia from 1942 to 1943. During the bombing of Darwin, there were 236 killed, 400 wounded, 30 aircraft destroyed, 11 vessels sunk, 3 vessels grounded, and 25 ships damaged. My relatives fought on the Owen Stanley Ridge against the Japanese Imperial Co-Prosperity Sphere alone. And we stopped them dead despite the Japanese having mountain artillery and superior forces. We were assisted by the indigenous Papua New Guineans who hated the Japanese and equally wanted to stop their advance into their homeland. The Japanese tortured our captured troops, put them in death camps and even resorted to cannibalism in their depraved manner. Our Australian troops showed them the bullet and bayonet. I also had relatives in Bomber Command in Britain flying Blenheim and Lancaster raids over National Socialist Germany from 1939 to 1945. They took part in 1,000 bomber raids on National Socialist ball-bearing factories while the Soviet Socialists refused them refueling landing fields in Russia to assist in the bombing campaign. Like Jason Unruhe, Dankey Kang, Comrade Net, and Ewoks Unhinged, the Soviet Socialist government was hysterically paranoid of the West and who saw spies everywhere. The Soviet Socialists were traitors and refused to keep up their end of the fight against the National Socialists. My family carried the war to the Italian Fascists, the German National Socialist and the Japanese Imperialists on all fronts, while the relatives of Jason Unruhe, Dankey Kang, Comrade Net and Ewoks Unhinged shirked and malingered on the home front. They were suspicious itinerant vagrants grafting off stockings and stolen ration cards. Fuck them. If they cannot tell anarchists from fascists, then why are these small children playing a man's game of realpolitik?